Thank you, Allen County, for letting us serve as your public library in 2022.
We love being your place for community resources, enriching programs, diverse collections of books, and more.
Thank you for your unwavering support over the years. It's the foundation around which we build our staff and library services.
Your ACPL has been serving the residents of Allen County for more than 127 years, and every day it continues to be a true honor.
As we look to the future of your ACPL, we're excited to continue fostering lifelong learning and discovery with a laser focus on the growth and needs of the entire Allen County community. Thank you for joining us in this effort.
We are your ACPL.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out today. Can everybody hear me all right? Great. Well, thank you for coming to YWCA's Diversity Dialogue about housing and race. We're really excited for this conversation and really happy that you've taken time out of your day to join us. Before we get started, I just want to go over a little bit about some ground rules for Diversity Dialogues, our conversation, and also fill everyone in about some upcoming events that YWCA is hosting within the next couple months. Before we begin, though, I'd like to introduce YWCA's new Racial Justice Coordinator, Heather Essex. Heather's at the back of the room. Welcome her. We're really excited to have her join the team and looking forward to what she brings to the table to these events. So for our diversity dialogues, to facilitate an open and honest discussion, we have a couple ground rules that we'd like to touch on before we get started. Please be humble in the name of learning. We all come to the table with different perspectives, life experiences, and political beliefs, and we just ask that you're open to new ideas. Please be sure to give everyone a chance to speak. And remember that we're trying to attack the problem, not the person. We ask that you are respectful to the confidentiality of personal views and stories shared during this experience. This dialogue is being live streamed and will be available through Allen County Public Library's public access channel. And we'll also have this available to watch on YWCA's website and YouTube channel. This dialogue is brought to you by YWCA's Level Up Council. The YWCA Northeast Indiana celebrates the community that embraces the inherent dignity of all people, and to encourage awareness and acceptance for diversity, YWCA's Level Up Council is proud to host diversity dialogues. Our vision is to help the region become an equitable place that we know it can be. It's time to level up Northeast Indiana. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, I'd like to welcome Gemma McClendon. Gemma is a licensed real estate broker with Century 21 Bradley and recently completed the Indiana Realtor Leadership Academy. She currently sits on the board of directors for the Upstate Alliance of Realtors and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, as well as the Government Affairs Committee. I encourage everybody to check out the Upstate Alliance Realtors website. There's some really great information there about equitable housing and resources. And they actually even have a great reading list, so if you want to check that out before you leave here, you can find good book recommendations as well. Pastor Javier Mongarden is the founder and CEO of Bridge of Grace Ministries, which is a faith-based community development organization in Southeast Fort Wayne. By purchasing, renovating, and reselling deteriorated homes, Bridge of Grace is working to reduce the rental rate from 66 to 30%. Is that correct, Javier? In Southeast Fort Wayne. And Jennifer Bukowski-Smith has over 20 years of nonprofit work, and she's serving as the Homelessness Strategy Manager in partnership of the City of Fort Wayne. Their Everyone Home community plan to prevent and end homelessness rolled out earlier this year, and we're really excited for this conversation about housing in our area. Before we begin, and of course, I'm Patty Dunn with YWCA. I have the pleasure of serving as an engagement coordinator. I work with volunteers and work with planning and implementing our fundraising and community events. I'd like to spread the word about our upcoming events in June. We have a great fundraiser for our Dress for Success program, June 4th through the 10th. You can find more information on our social media and on our website. We have 10 wonderful models that are modeling clothing for our Dress for Success boutique. And every vote for the models will go to our Dress for Success program. We are happy to promote the History Hills event through Health Visions Midwest. That's going to be here downstairs in the auditorium on June 13th from 6 until 8. And the Power of Positive Gossip, Coffee and Conversations will be hosted on June 28th at Brotherhood Mutual, and the topic is the power of positive gossip. We will be hosting Christina Jimenez from Courageous Healing and Tricia Marie Strausser from Bring It, Push It, Own It to talk about the power of positive gossip. And you can save the date for our upcoming diversity dialogues. August 17th, we're going to be talking about criminalization and race. And on November 9th, we will be talking about thankfulness and diversity. If you know of anybody that would like an opportunity to serve with the Y, you can always check out our website. We have a number of job openings from domestic violence awareness advocates to client care technicians. And we do ask if you'd like to support our work, please always jump onto our website to donate to our causes. It's really through donations that we are able to continue the good work in our community. All right. We're really excited to get started today with diversity dialogue conversation here. My first question to the panel, how do you see racial disparities in housing play out now, and how do you see people being affected by that?
Start us off.
Well, I'll start. So it's an honor to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. Well, I was thinking about this question, and the wealth gap is it's not a secret. There is a wealth gap, right? And I was looking at the numbers, and the average household whose head, this is what I found, that the average household whose head is 35 years old, by the age 35 in white household is already $30,000 or $20,000 more than a black or Hispanic household. After 35 years, so when it gets to 55 years old, the same household head would be $175,000 more in equity compared to a Hispanic or a black person. So there is a gap already. We know that. That is no secret. There is no question that poverty is connected to housing disparities. Probably the problem with the wealth and the poverty is connected to housing. And so I was thinking more at ground level. So I'm in Southeast Fort Wayne. I moved into a neighborhood there about 15 years ago. Live in the Mount Vernon Park neighborhood. And so when I came, I remember that rents, if you're familiar with Southeast Fort Wayne, the houses are about 900 square feet to 1,000 square feet, very small. So a two-bedroom home at that time was about $500 a month for rent. In 2008, a three-bedroom would be about $600 a month for rent. Today, we see now rates of $900 to $1,200 a month for the same type of home. Now, when you consider that the household income, the AMI, is $25,000 per household in that particular area, then that means that our neighbors are paying 50 to 60% of their household income for rent. And so you can see how can you survive and how can you move ahead out of poverty when you are paying more than 50 or 60% of that. So that's where I see the biggest problem, I think, that people are not able to move out of poverty because the cost of living and rent is just too expensive.
And I think, Javier kind of covered all of that, is that the current market for rent is just taking too much of individuals' incomes, and the wages aren't keeping up with what landlords can start to charge for their rents currently. Indiana also allows 30 days notice to increased rent. And so if anybody ends up in a month-to-month lease, then that just increases the possibility that they're not going to be able to afford. I've heard numerous stories of, well, my rent increased and I couldn't afford it. I know, so I worked at Vincent Village for a year and a half, and in that time we had individuals who were working for apartment complexes but could not afford to rent those units. And so just that wage gap, that poverty. So when working with United Way, we look at ALICE numbers as well as the percent poverty. So ALICE is, okay, now I'm totally going to blow it now that I'm being recorded. Asset limited, income constrained, employed individuals. And so that just still means in 2023, those dollars aren't stretching, and that they are rent burdened. So then they're making choices between healthcare, childcare, food, and so the dollar doesn't go as far. But housing is such a basic need, and it just bottom line costs too much right now, and or there aren't enough units available. So Javier mentioned AMI, so area median income. If you are 30% below, you're lucky if you can find a unit that is affordable to you, meaning you're not spending more than 30% of your income. But like he said, if you're paying 50 to 60% upwards, that doesn't leave you any wiggle room to plan for any kind of emergency that may come up. And unfortunately, right, the poverty numbers show that there is the disparity for non-white renters. And then there are also those certain populations where there are more renters in general. Another study showed that over the last 10 years, the number of renters has slightly increased. It's nothing major, but then that also just increases the competition for the same amount of units that are out there in the community.
Thank you. So I guess that leads me to my next question. How has the housing landscape affected renters lately in our community?
It's kind of, just more of the same. And I think that when the dollars don't go very far, you've got this set income each month. In Indiana, you to pay for a market rate apartment, you need to, for a 2-bedroom, you need to be making at least $15.80 an hour to be able to afford that. And so again, the minimum wage isn't necessarily all people are making, but there's just not enough of those affordable units. And there's also maybe less interest in building those affordable units, or the combination and the hoops that have to be jumped through to get tax credits and things like that, to build more affordable, sustainable units for those lower income renters is just hard. I mean, even, I've known coworkers who have struggled to maintain rents and who are like, I'm very lucky, but I'm planning for an increase this year, at my next annual signing. But again, not everybody has that luxury, or they're working so many jobs and trying to do everything to make ends meet that then that is just impacting the overall quality of life.
I also think I've seen it personally when somebody is open to actually purchase a home. One thing that obviously as you're preparing to purchase for a home, the lenders will look at your credit, they'll look at your income, your debt to income. One thing that has been hard for renters though in preparing is that because they look at your evictions as well, some people are not able because of that really trying to catch up with their bills, and they can't. Sometimes if landlords aren't fixing those major things that they need, they'll hold back on rent because they have to fix it, or they become late or whatever that looks like. And the unfortunate thing for renters here in Indiana, and we were briefly talking about it, is I found out that Indiana is not is more friendlier to landlords than it is to renters. So other states actually have implementation of what they call an equity for renters. So if landlords do not take care of the necessities, the required things that, basic necessities to live, heat, water, infestations, those type of things, renters can then pay the court. And what happens is the court will then release that money to the landlord once that's done. Renters don't have that protection here. So I think that makes it difficult too when you're already dealing with your low budget and now you kind of have to fight landlord. So so if the landscape here, I think, could use a lot more advocacy for our renters. So.
And then just to piggyback too on those comments, so the community has housing choice vouchers, formerly known as Section 8, but Fort Wayne Housing Authority is one of the entities that can issue those vouchers, but only 30% of the individuals who were granted those vouchers have been able to use them recently. And so as was pointed out, it's things like they're looking at your credit score, your eviction record, your criminal history, and so in using that voucher, you still have to qualify for that landlord or that property manager's level of criteria to be accepted into that unit, even while the amount covered with that rent, or it may require a portion from Fort Wayne Housing Authority, a portion from the tenant, but it still generally covers a market rate. They just aren't able to use those vouchers. And so I read that they're recently increasing the number of vouchers, and that's great, but until we get more usage out of those vouchers, that's not necessarily going to be a solution to getting more individuals into rental properties. So we need to look at that bigger picture of, what do we do about those individuals and families who can't use those vouchers in our community.
I think I want to mention an aspect that maybe some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not. But the situation at the border, there's a lot of families coming to Fort Wayne from different countries seeking asylum. And so there's more and more coming. They're expecting even more. And so what we've seen is that I had a call from these pastors. So in the last year, Bridge of Grace has purchased 14 homes in our neighborhood. We went into a capital campaign. We raised funding to be able to buy homes, continue to buy and decrease the rental rate, increase the home ownership by providing affordable homes. So we've been buying some of them, in good shape. Average, and so it needs a little work. Some of them need a lot of work. And so we have about 5 under construction right now of those 14. The other ones, we did some work, and then we put a family in there. We got calls from pastors, and so there was a pastor who called us and said, we have these families attending our church. They're from Colombia. They're seeking asylum, and they are living, their conditions they're living is just not good. 6 people in the family living in a one-bedroom trailer home, 6 people for $800 a month. And so there were 2 families living in that trailer home. And so the landscape looks like very landlords and people are taking advantage also from families like this. And so we were able to fix a home and then move this family into a 3-bedroom home for the same price. And so it is, that's another aspect that I think we should consider and think about, because it's going to happen even more.
Yeah.
Thank you. So for those renters and other individuals, how can they seek to ensure that they are treated fairly?
Fort Wayne Metro is a great resource for residents here. And so they support residents by, if there's even, if there's a potential discrimination or they feel like they don't know enough to address the situation, Fort Wayne Metro will advocate for residents. So they're very unbiased. They just investigate the situation. And there's also on their website a lot of information. They have educational courses that people can take as well. So they're a wonderful resource here.
That's great. Thank you.
I also think I see some service providers in the room. I think education, because Indiana is more friendly towards landlords, educating the tenants about what their rights are so that they really understand what their lease says, what those parameters are, that they do still have to pay rent even if the landlord isn't doing the repairs, but document those and maybe seek out legal services, volunteer lawyer program, other resources in the community are available to help if someone feels like they are not getting the other side of that contract that they have signed with the landlord. And I will say with the Everyone Home platform, we are in the process of building out our website. And one goal I have with that is to provide education and be a spot for individuals to go to help understand those, what their rights are, what they've signed, have somebody take somebody with you so that you understand what you're agreeing to. Actually read it before you just sign, your name away so that you understand when's rent due, what's the late charge, requirements. There is no cap on late charges for rent in Indiana. And so I think it's, again, just about, education and understanding. And so whether it's you yourselves or helping, talk to someone and just let them understand what it is that that lease agreement is, that contract that they may be signing, as well as knowing that Metro is available if they do suspect possible discrimination.
Thank you. So one question I think I'm curious to hear everyone's input on. What are some creative ideas to solving the housing crisis in our area? This can be through renters and home ownership. What do you think is promising? Is there things that you think maybe we're doing that is not working as well as it should be?
Yeah, it's very complex, right? Because of policies and a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's a big question. I think
is.
for us, again, we're very focused on our neighborhood, and now we kind of took on, if you're familiar, it's the Mount Vernon Park neighborhood. So our boundaries are Pettit on the north, Paulding on the south, Hannah on the east, the west, and then South Anthony on the east. And now we took on Pettit Rudison neighborhood as well, and we're trying to develop and the process that we did in our neighborhood there too. As we're doing it, of course, so we look at the rental rate in 2010, the last census, it was 66% rental rate in our neighborhood. And so, after reading research, they said that a good, healthy neighborhood would be more like 70% homeowners and 30% rentals. And so I know some people prefer no rentals in their area, but when it comes to affordability, it's okay to have rentals. In fact, you want to have rentals because it shows that they're still affordable for people to live there. And so that's our goal. Our goal is to make it healthy and affordable still people to move in. And so 30% is our goal. We are at 51% today. After so many years, we've done about 30 homes, and then Habitat has come and built new homes with new owners as well. And so we are 51% owners. It's taken a long time, right? It's not easy because you really need a lot of money to continue to buy homes and lower the rental rates, I think. And it's not easy either because you have to find people where they are. Again, if they have $25,000 income and they're paying 50 or 60%, how do you get them to make enough to be able to qualify for a mortgage? And so those are all the challenges that we are trying to deal with. How is it financial empowerment, financial it's not just to go to classes for finances and home ownership, but they need to increase how much they make too. And so we're looking at all of that, and that's very complex. It's really difficult. We hired a consultant that came and wanted to look at a landscape today of our neighborhood and that Pettit Rudison neighborhood. And after 6 months, they developed a report to us. And of course, they found out what we knew, that a lot of people apply for mortgages and are being turned down and being denied. So there's a lot of barriers to homeownership. People do apply, but they are denied. And a lot of it has to do with not making enough or not having all the requirements that they need. But we're looking at something that is very difficult, but it's done in other neighborhoods, in other cities. I don't know that there is one in Indiana, but it's called a community land trust. So if you're familiar with a community land trust, if you're not, I invite you to seek into it, look into it. It's really great program. What a community land trust does is basically creates affordable housing for perpetuity. If you have a community land trust that continues to add more homes, to buy more homes and buy more homes, you buy those homes and then you sell them at affordable price, and then you create this contract with the person who buys it or the family who buys it. And then that house is in this community land trust with the idea of keeping it affordable for perpetuity. So you have a 99-year contract. So they still get equity, the families get equity, but it's committed to have it affordable for a lifetime. And so community land trust is one of the things we're looking at in the future. We still have to be educated on it more, and then the community, and then the philanthropy, because we would like the philanthropy to get involved as well. But that's one of the things we're looking at.
There's a lot of pathways to home ownership, and I do know that with people needing to make more, and in that bridge of time where they're maybe going to school or thinking about going to school, or even being exposed to the opportunity to go to school or get a trade, there are some opportunities here locally that you just have to find out about. There's different, for people that could get approved, there are down payment assistance, there's different programs such as Pathfinders, it's a subsidiary. So there are different ways that people can purchase a home at lower rates, but it has to be a good fit. So it's about education as well. But I still think that giving that financial literacy and I heard you said that it's going to be implemented in schools finally, so that's a good thing, but those type of starts is going to be super beneficial for future homeowners. But there are different ways that our city and our communities are trying to provide opportunities for those pathways to home ownership as well. So Habitat is one of them, and then having access to all resources, encourage people to just get with their local associations, get with their local, Ys, and just even a lender, just having a conversation, it's free. They'll answer the questions that you have. You just use our resources. We're too intimidated because it's something that we've never treaded before. But, it's an easy conversation to have, and it's free. So encouraging that to our communities.
Along with that, like going through your actual credit report to see, is it accurate? Are there things that should be challenged? We had a client who raised their score 50 points by saying, no, this really has been paid off. And so it's being aware, again, that education, what's your situation? And I think as far as addressing the housing crisis, it's really about creative solutions and the partnerships with it, right? None of us are working alone. And so who can you work together with? Jenna mentioned Habitat. Habitat is working with the city, and I think I heard that they, for the first time, kind of outsold the number of spaces that were available, and they had to turn people down, which is a good and bad problem to have. But I think if groups can come together and look at the solution, maybe things like more multifamily units and not just single-family homes. I think that is been kind of, the model in, most of the United States, but maybe we can get creative and build different kind of spaces, different uses. We've in conversations with individuals coming out of shelter settings, they don't necessarily want to be on their own. They want to be maybe near somebody else that they know and have that sense of community. And so there's a whole lot out there that we can look at, but need the resources to be able to really have a large enough impact on getting everyone housed. And not just housing itself, it's the other elements of life that cost money and or resources. Because to get maybe to that better paying job, you need transportation. And yes, we have a bus system, and they're aware that there's some limitations to that. So how do you get to the better paying jobs? What about childcare? And how do you afford all of those things together to be able to, minimize some of those expenses and how far those your money and your resources can go. So it's really a community-wide problem, and that's why I'm especially excited for the Everyone Home. We have a steering committee with individuals from across sectors in the city, and then we are starting to break down into different subcommittees to start to address and create action plans. So it's not just a piece of paper that's out there. We are really going to do the work. And so we take that charge seriously. And so I hope next year we have some improvements to report in that way, whether it be increased usage of the vouchers or new building going in somewhere. But I think it takes group efforts and not just everybody working alone. And so how can all of us work on those solutions?
Thank you. I was just curious, with that question, how can we look at that through a shelter lens? So not just individuals who are trying to become homeowners or find equitable rentals, but how can we address that issue at a city level for those who are homeless and seeking shelter?
So Everyone Home is based on a strategic plan that was a couple-year planning process, and what it found is that our community is lacking a shelter for youth, which is in process. It's just facing some hurdles because funding comes with stipulations, but then also low barrier shelters. We are fortunate to have several different shelter communities throughout the city, but some of them will serve a certain population or have different criteria for entrance. And so the idea is that if we can get a low barrier shelter or a lower barrier shelter, because we have hurdles where a couple, man and woman, cannot stay in the same place together. The only options that take shelters, you have to have children. So what if you don't have children but are a couple? What if you have pets? What if you don't want to leave your pets behind? Because, right, I have my forever friends at my house, and if I lost that, I would not want to leave them. And so we are looking at those options as well, because there is just not enough. But the difficulty in that is it's really hard to identify the homeless population in Fort Wayne, and in general. That's not just a Fort Wayne problem. Let me take back that statement. Because the way the government counts homeless individuals is one night in January. They try to find all individuals and families who spent the night on the street the night before. This year it happened to be a snowstorm. And so I don't know how our numbers are going to look at the end of that, because again, that's another space where it takes a group effort. Technically, Fort Wayne is part of a 9-county region. We need all the counties to participate because that determines how much government dollars get put back into the community to then address the needs. And so it's called the point-in-time count, if you've ever heard that, or the PIT count. So anyone who works in housing should be familiar with that. And so we need to get more individuals participating in that so that we can get a better representation of what's happening here. Because if you look at some of those formal numbers, you're going to say, oh, all we have is 200 homeless individuals. Well, that is not the best way to count the individuals facing homelessness in the city. The school systems, the other part is HUD has one very narrow definition of homelessness, and then the school system can function off the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, and that includes doubled up. So Javier is talking about 6 people in a 1-bedroom. Well, there could be multiple families sharing one home because they want to keep their families together. No one wants to go to a shelter. Let's be real. It's nobody's first choice when they get evicted. And so if they find someone who can take them all in, well, doubled up doesn't count under HUD's definition as homelessness, but the schools can count those. And so we've kind of got different numbers to reconcile with that, but there is still definitely a need to provide additional shelter services and space. And again, trying to meet people where they're at in why are they not seeking shelter? Why haven't they gone here? Some individuals get banned from various locations and can't go back. Then you also want to look at mental health and substance abuse issues and, what has happened in their life that they are now homeless. And so trying to address the root causes of things. So I could keep going on, but so I will pause there for...
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Does anybody else have anything to add?
I don't do shelters because it's very complex too, right? It's talking about complexity, but I know of this nonprofit it's an organization called Homeboy Industries. It's in Los Angeles, and they don't. It's not a shelter to be for homeless. It's actually an organization that focuses on getting gang members out of the gangs, and so they have a program. I think the biggest success with them is almost the same thing because they get them out of the gangs and they get them to live in the centers that they have, and then they have programs. But the biggest success I think that they have is they have social enterprises. So they created social enterprises, businesses, so that when the guys and girls are going through this program in classes, they also have an opportunity to work, and they work and they get paid and all of that. I'm sure they have their own systems, and I know they have their own problems too. But the level of success on how many graduate from the program is so higher than shelters that what we see here. And I just thought that that's the comprehensive approach that they have to getting people out of that lifestyle and then giving them a job and purpose. And jobs give you purpose, right? If you want to look for purpose, that's where you find it. And so I just see that could be I know it's very complicated because if you get funding from federal or state, there's limitations of the things that you can offer and do. So I know it's hard, but I think that's one of the I think is brilliant what they do.
Absolutely, providing that financial empowerment
Yes.
and education.
Yeah. And purpose.
And
Yeah,
purpose, yes. So I'm curious, what changes as a community could we improve the outcomes to having people of all races have the opportunity to housing that would work best for them?
Our climate has been changing. Well, it's been in progression for years, but really since I think most recent social situations, I think diversity and inclusion has really grown in different areas in leaps and bounds. But I still think that as we're all trying to navigate through what that looks like, reparative measures can be done just within your own organizations, reviewing the past processes, policies, practices, and looking at them now, and seeing how they compare and how we can do better. But it's almost like a lack of a better phrase, really a grass movement where we individually look at what our current policies are and see where we need to really implement some changes because it's changing, everybody connected, that what even that looks like is changing. Those 15 people that ran the organization 20 years ago, it probably looks a lot different now, but then how do we get them to really move forward some really great agendas that are out there? So that's something that, I think would be pretty beneficial.
I guess I would, continuing to have opportunities to talk and share ideas, right? Continuing along the lines of these diversity dialogues and including individuals of all backgrounds in those conversations. I know one of the goals with Everyone Home is to include those with lived experience on the homelessness side of things, so that, I've been trying to learn from those in different roles, but, until I am able to include those and have those voices and actually listen to those voices, like you started out this session of being open to learn and be open to new ideas. And so I think it's just trying to increase that across the board, community-wide.
It would be great to have a group that is just dedicated to advocacy and policy change, right? That would be the most amazing thing, to have just a group that's dedicated to do that at a state level and local level, maybe the city. I mean, that would be the best thing. I think if you can make sure, Metro, I think they are, if something happens, then they can they make sure that the policies are being put into practice. But is there somebody who's dedicated to just advocate and create new policies and helping? That would be a dream, I think. One of the reasons why a community land trust is so appealing to us is because community land trust has the people who live in the community are the people who are making the decisions for what they want to see in their neighborhood. So as you acquire more and more land in your area, the people is 66% of the board of control of the community land trust is people from the community. And so that is why it's so appealing to us, because then it's people who live there are the one making the decisions for what they want to see in their community, and they have the control. And so that is why it's so appealing. I think that's important. But again, then you'll need so many community land trusts around the area where you see the more disparities and the most discrimination and all of that. So I think it's really tough.
And to go back again, vote, pay attention to who's on your ballot, because the general session, there were several bills related to housing that were proposed but didn't go anywhere. One of them, we talk about, there are out-of-state companies who have bought up some apartment complexes and they don't necessarily have local representation. There was one of the bills proposed having someone who could respond within 24 hours, but those didn't get passed. And so knowing who the representatives are and what actions they're taking, contacting your legislators to let them know what are the important causes that you support, so that in future sessions, things like that maybe could be addressed. Because there were, Prosperity Indiana is a good group that follows that kind of information, if you're able to look on their website. And so I learned about all of the different bills that were proposed earlier this year, just to kind of see, and they'll share with you ways, different groups will share ways on how you as an individual, because I understand, you might be in an employment position that does not allow you to advocate or do any kind of lobbying, but as a resident, you may want to take some additional actions.
Thank you. I guess as you brought up the growth of Fort Wayne and having these out-of-state property companies come in, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about that and how that is affecting renters, probably most, specifically here downtown Fort Wayne.
I don't necessarily have a lot of anecdotal evidence about downtown, but downtown revitalization is great. So there are nice condos and spaces down here now, but it appears to be maybe pushing some of the homeless population into other residential areas who it's a newer thing for them. And so we are attempting to work with some outreach groups in the community to address that, because if someone is living on the streets, they're potentially banned from homeless shelters, don't have the means to go anywhere else. But if their stuff gets moved or thrown away, like they're just going to have to go somewhere else because there aren't enough openings to serve everyone who's out there. Again, that's just anecdotal, nothing specific, numbers wise. And so again, I would just encourage wherever possible supporting the idea of building, encouraging, purchasing homes, focusing on renting them at affordable rates, those kinds of things, because we just don't have enough we're short on housing stock to begin with, period. And then the housing stock that's affordable within your income is even less. And so the lower your income, the lower your options are. And so just kind of being aware of that. And again, potentially that legislation might have prevented that, but the bottom line is that, there's capitalism at work, and if people can make income, they're going to make income. And maybe not be as socially minded in what they're charging and how they're changing any of their policies.
We'll have question and answers. Yes, very soon here. Before we open that up to questions and answers, I just wanted to ask, I know there was a couple different groups and resources that has been mentioned in this talk, but other groups that are established to better promote policies around housing that anyone in this audience or watching on the live stream can join.
So as I mentioned, Prosperity Indiana is a statewide advocacy group. If you are local, Everyone Home, the website is everyonehomefw.org. We are convening subcommittees currently. We have 3 focus areas, but have the thought that we are likely to expand. Our first kind of 3 areas to initiate are landlord engagement, low barrier services, and prevention. That's one thing I haven't mentioned yet in the conversation today, but trying to keep people in their homes. How do we, identify who is at risk, helping those families with that financial empowerment, finding, increased income, other resources, so that they don't add to the homeless population. And then there is also another group that's regional. So Everyone Home is Fort Wayne specific, but there is the Regional Planning Council on Homelessness, and that is primarily housing providers, but can also be open to others with, knowledge of ways to help support the mission of assisting individuals with housing. So.
Great. Well, we're going to open up the dialogue to everyone, both in the room and on live stream. So if you have a question that you would like to ask our panel, go ahead and raise your hand. We have Donna who has a microphone, so she'll walk that to you. And we just ask that you wait till the mic arrives so we can make sure those on the live stream can hear.
I was wondering if you could address redlining.
So, we're not allowed to. I mean, redlining is something that's, just illegal at its best. We have to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to live where they want to. That's, and our obligation as far as realtors and brokers, that our obligation and duty is to our clients. And if they want to live in certain areas that even in our own personal opinions don't feel like they should, that's not our place to steer them anywhere. They can live wherever they so choose. So that's, and that's something that in our industry NAR is really big on making sure that we're, on top of that brokers are being accountable. And there's been lots of studies and lots of undercover undercover documentaries and investigations that have taken place to ensure that across the country, that that's not happening. But again, it's up to your local body too. You know, at Upstart, we're making sure that conversations are had, and we're being very diligent in making sure that education is going forward. So even with our newer brokers, that they understand what that is, and to ensure that they don't break any laws that way as well.
So you guys are saying that it doesn't happen?
No, I can't say that it doesn't happen, but the only thing we can do is try to ensure by way of education and accountability.
It happens.
Yeah.
It happens. The answer is
can't-
yes.
Go ahead.
You're right. No, the answer is right. Is you know, I was going to say, when you talk about policies, the Fair Housing Act, you know, has been in existence for so long, but you still see the numbers today, and you see that it exists, right? It exists, unfortunately. But I'm glad to hear that people, you know, they get educated,
Yeah.
all the realtors. But I mean, you can't deny that it happens today too, still.
And also, there's a group out of Indianapolis. I don't know the full acronym, but there's Fair Housing for Central Indiana, something along those lines. They did a presentation at the Fair Housing Summit here, and talked a lot about the history of redlining, and that the reality is that it did happen, and there's not been a concerted effort to undo it. So it still feels like the practice is still happening because it's not been undone,
Right.
but it should no longer be happening. So, but it again, it may not have adjusted itself yet.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I got here late, so if you have addressed my question already, and it's kind of piggybacking off of what was already asked, what are the racial disparities in housing? What does that look like today? And number two, the second part of my question, what can we do about the systemic racism that affects housing? How do we as individuals, as residents of Fort Wayne, combat this? What policy should we be looking out for? What should we be advocating for? How do we change maybe situations at the banks that make it unfair for people to afford the housing, or the criteria that makes it unfair for people to actually get a home?
I can tell you that African Americans represent a higher majority in the homeless population than they do in the actual population of the city. And Fort Wayne has a higher minority population than compared to like the state average. I don't have great answers to undo some of the systemic issues, but I wish it did not exist. And so, you know, hoping that with, so I work with it, and it's called the Everyone Home Plan, trying to prevent and end homelessness in the community. And we are aware of the racial disparities that exist, and will try to build some efforts in place to reduce the disparity in numbers affected by homelessness, and, you know, looking at in poverty situations.
As far as, like, if you are purchasing a home and you want to know, you know, you really have, it's a really person by person as well. You're a consumer, so you're absolutely allowed to ask any question you want to your lender or to whoever you're working with that's supposed to be representing you in this process. And so educating yourself and asking the questions that are important to you, getting with your professionals to see if you're being guided the right way, those are all the ways that you can, you know, be involved for your personal decision-making, and also just being aware. And again, leaning back on our resource with Fort Wayne Metro, if you even feel like there's been any type of discrimination, you have every right to make that known and have somebody look into that. But as far as banking, those are, you know, they are supposed to give you why they made the decision they, you know, made. They're supposed to legally give those things to you. So if you feel like, you know, you weren't being treated fairly, or your application wasn't looked at the same way, you have every right to ask that lender to break that decision-making down to you.
I just wanted to note that we do have some slips of paper with a QR code on the table that have further information. And so we've gathered some of those information on different policies that are out there, and as well as some information on further understanding some of the challenges. So we've named that income discrepancies are one of the causes for racial discrepancies in housing. Redlining and the history of excluding people of color from certain neighborhoods, compounded on top of income inequality, compounded on top of perpetuating different rates of loans and other things over the years, all has compounded on top of each other, along with all the other types of discrimination that occur to result in those wealth disparities that Pastor Javier was speaking of earlier. And it all goes on top to mean that housing isn't equally available currently. And so I think some of the policy proposals that I was reading about in preparation, putting together resources for this, was things like having different zoning. I think one of you mentioned where there's more opportunity to build different types of housing throughout the community, so that instead of boxing out opportunities for new different housing to become available, there could be more options. Some cities have gone to prohibiting any kind of income discrimination. So if someone has a voucher, currently landlords in our area can say, nope, I just don't take vouchers. And that's legal. But in some cities, they've gone to outlawing that kind of ruling, so that landlords are required to treat all income, whatever income sources people have, to pay their rent as legitimate. And so that can be another way. So hopefully, feel free to check out those resources and see, because it'd be interesting to think more about what policies. You can also, some cities prohibit rent increases of over a certain amount, or require more notice to be given. It'd be interesting to think about what of these different ideas could help us here in Fort Wayne to promote furthering of equal opportunity moving forward, or even redress, so that people who haven't had the same opportunities could access more. So those were some things I wanted to add and make sure you knew those were available.
Thank you, Carla.
I would add to that, the disinvestment, so talking about Southeast particularly, right? The disinvestment for many, many years that we've saw for many, many years from businesses and economic disinvestment affected, right, the value of the homes. And it is proven that the houses in black or where people of color live are devalued by 23% more than any other places. And so even the people who own today in our area, in our neighborhood, don't see the equity that other people who bought a house in a different zip code can see, is because the houses are devalued, and so they're not, they can't afford another house. If they want, they don't have that opportunity that others have, that I own this house for a certain amount of time as my first home. Now I can move to a second home that is bigger and better. They can't, because the equity that is built is not enough to do that, so, yeah.
So the question was asked, who decides that?
Who decides
Your appraisals, your appraisers will do that. And so going back to those practices, those reparative plans is to look at each industry and try to figure out what was done, what we're doing, and try to see if we can repair some of those things. I'm not an appraiser, but they are the ones that determine price value in homes. And so they are also being looked at very closely as well to make sure that they're following, their policies and practices. But they are the ones who determine the value of a home.
And it's appraisal bias. And there is also a lot of undercover situations, stories of people who, because they had artifacts and pictures, because they were black or were and then the appraisal was lower. And then when they removed those artifacts and the pictures, the appraisal that
Was
came
raised up.
was raised up to $100,000. So it's just incredible.
Substantial
Yeah.
amount. We have a question over here.
Well, it's kind of a question and a comment. So a lot of what I hear is that education is one of the key factors in all of this. When I think about coming up in school and all of that, economics as a whole, macro, is a requirement for graduation. Home economics is an elective. And what it actually represents, well, back in my day, we learned how to cook. But actually understanding finance of a home and what it takes to manage a home, and even if it's a single home, because if you think about it, a lot of people are going into adulthood or young adulthood and independence, and a lot of the debt that they're incurring happens during their college years. And that affects them going forward in life. And they're not how that affects their future is not necessarily the thought, okay? And so how do we, I know Gemma, you had mentioned that is becoming a part of the curriculum of school, and that's promising, but how do we help ensure that is more of the focus? Because it is important, because again, it accounts for that affordability and being able to survive beyond a schooling in the early adulthood.
So as it relates to home buying, I know there's a different process, getting to rent a home, or getting housed and then renting even. But in regards to purchasing, that's really where that community effort comes. Fort Wayne has held several first-time home buying seminars, luncheons, workshops. And for the most part, there's a couple that have really good attendance. And there are some that there's just a couple people. So getting the word out, because during those workshops, you will have a room full of lenders, brokers, insurance agents, anything affiliated to purchasing a home, and they can give you the information you need. Whether you're ready in that moment, you could find out you're ready and be pleasantly surprised, or you could say, hey, these are things I need to prepare for. But the attendance to those are kind of small. I think there's a couple recently that had really good attendance. I think it was the Rainy. I wasn't able to attend, but I've heard that they have good numbers. It's programs and functions like that really help educate our community. And sometimes, though, we kind of, lack of a better phrase again, we sleep on them. We don't think that they're really worthy, but they're phenomenal. You know what I mean? So that education piece is really vital. I agree with you. It's super vital, because when we're younger, we don't realize the value. And in some communities, minority communities, it is not taught the value of home ownership, and also how to maintain your home so you can get the best equity out of your home. Teaching a new homeowner in that first year, this is what you need to do every year, to maintain your home, to get value from it. There's just so many different things that education can really play a piece. And that's why even if somebody's not in a place that they can own a home, but just giving them that goal, even if it's 5, 6, 7 years out, I'm homeless right now, but what my goal is, I would love to have a home. And so even just planting that into somebody's mind to say it's possible, then those steps can be taken to purchase your home. But education is definitely vital for the process.
And if I heard that as a possible volunteer to help host a workshop, we can talk later. But I do know that Fort Wayne Housing Authority, through their Housing Opportunities Program, they do a renter training certification process, and I'm butchering that, I'm sure, but it's looking at things like financial literacy. I don't know how much they do about proper care and maintenance of the home, but I think that is something, that maybe could be built into the Everyone Home Plan. I feel like we've got some like flexibility and potential there, and great spaces like the library to use, that if, we could find, hey, this is, some conversations that we might want to have if there's an audience for that, then, that is something that we could look at, because I agree it's something that is, kind of fallen through the cracks. And I don't know that unless we can get to all the school boards and say, we need some basic life skills, or, ADLs, activities of daily living is a common term, for people working with those with intellectual disabilities or other, disabilities, but it's probably more needed than we realize, because we were just talking before the panel started. It seems like there's been maybe some generational loss in things, because I don't cook. My mom is disappointed in me. I don't cook, but I have other options. So, but yeah, I'm again open to that, having a conversation if that's something that you feel would benefit.
And teaching, the younger generation, even people our age, the value of home ownership, because that's another gap, because you have the minority population that they don't have the wealth to pass on to their children when they sell their homes. Our community needs to see the value in that. You know what I mean? And so that also gives inspiration to say, you know what, I want to own a home because I want to leave something to my children, or just have some type of investment. But teaching, the minority population about that is super valuable as well. Yes, yeah. Because the white communities, in something that I had read, the white communities, they have the inheritance. You're going to have the white population where they have an inheritance coming from their parents, versus the minority communities do not. So teaching our children about that is vital.
We have time for one more question here.
So this is a comment kind of piggybacking off of what you just said. A lot of what's being discussed are structural issues. And a lot of the wealth gap was created by housing discrimination, federal, state, and local practices that were happening for decades. And there's some innovative things that are going on in other cities around housing reparations. And I think that could be I think that's a way to address some of the structural changes. I don't know if it'll ever happen in Indiana because of, politics and things going on here, but looking at areas that were redlined and figuring out, if you can show that your family was redlined, there are some ways to provide the money to get you the homes and different things. So there are changes that could be made, but they're structural, and it's not always up to people who you just aren't educated enough, or you just don't. There are reasons why you don't have money for a down payment, and there's reasons why you don't have wealth to pass on to other generations. So there's some solutions out there that are innovative. So if you look at San Francisco and Evanston, Illinois, there are some reparations programs going on that are worth considering.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone, especially our panelists, for such a fruitful conversation. We really appreciate that. Do we have one more? Okay. Looks like we have one more comment.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I feel like we've been seeing over the years where these neighborhoods that were previously kind of median homes were very good neighborhoods for first-time home buyers to come in and buy houses. Take the 07, for example. It was that for a few years. And then word got out and caught on, and now everyone's coming in. They buy the houses, they flip them quick, and then they're priced out. And so I'm wondering, when we see this happening with more and more neighborhoods, what is the overall effect that has on home ownership, especially for first-time home buyers, when we're seeing neighborhoods that were equitable, that were diverse, and this trend is kind of happening to them? What is the fallout of that then? What is the consequences of that?
I'm trying to process the question. So a neighborhood that was once just an average neighborhood, okay.
The 46807.
Yeah, 46807. So,
That's exactly.
yeah, that just shows how valuable neighborhoods can be. I mean, because it's also up to the desirability of the neighborhoods. You know what I mean? So that plays into, so if you have people coming in, and even though they're flipping the homes, but if the people buying them are keeping up their neighborhoods and keeping up with their home ownership, it just adds value to our community. The problem comes when you might have had a multiple offer situation, and now, you know, somebody bought it 40,000 above. They've got to wait a while before they can really see their equity. You know what I mean? Because they bought cash, and so if an appraiser comes in, it may not, you know, be valued at that in 5 years when they want to move. So they've got to, you know, long term, we've got to stay here for a while. I wanted the house, and this is how much I wanted it for, so here's my cash. And, you know, so appraisers can't touch the cash ones. But it just goes to show how valuable our communities can become. So I don't necessarily see it as a negative. It just, that pride in home ownership can be, you know, can be seen in that. Because the 07 in particular is a beautiful area, you know, and it is highly desirable. And I think people, you know, kind of slept on it for a while, but it's a beautiful area.
And actually, it is happening in, the 07 is great, but other areas are seeing that as well, including my suburb area. I was shocked at what my neighbor's house sold for, but then it won't buy as much to the next place, right? But then I had a landlord share with me, one of his concerns as a landlord is that the assessments are going up. And so his assessment doubled in a couple of properties in like 46803. And so that's not necessarily an area that you would think might have that kind of a jump. But then I was also thinking, well, how close is that to something like Electric Works that is then making that now an adjacent desirable area? And so, right, certain different things that happen across the city are likely to just cause impact. And right now, I just feel like housing prices are high in general, which, again, if you can't afford to buy the house, the rentals are high. Like, it's housing is just a high expense for, I think, everyone right now. And so it could happen in lots of different areas. And then I think it's just about what happens with the ebbs and flows of the market.
And for families and individuals that were living in those areas and now they can't afford rent in those areas, I tell you what happens to them is they are forced to move into areas of poverty, areas where are violent. There are a lot of violence where they didn't desire by themselves. They couldn't decide where to live. They have no choice. Those are the only areas they can afford, and it's really, really sad to see that.
And that kind of hello? Okay. Yeah. That kind of just brings to mind, you mentioned appraisal bias, and there's this conversation of the role of education, economics, and awareness and increasing. How do I, if I am a poor Black child, and to escape poverty, I take out student loans, I get myself college educated, I go and get myself a job. How does all of that stand up to appraisal bias? Say if I am like my grandmother, she has owned her home for 3 generations now. And even with like what they were doing with the intention of the jail site and like looking out on the East Allen County, right? So they devalued even someone like her as a 3-generation homeowner, right? They said, well, that community over there has less value. How do we, as minorities, as people who grew up in poverty, it seems like we are tasked with facing such a giant. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter if I'm educated because that appraisal bias has now been legitimized and it's a formulaic approach, right? And so nobody can say, well, there's bias. Well, no, that's a formula, right? So it's legitimized now. So it seems to me that the burden isn't just on communities in need to develop. I think the industries, housing, education, whatever, have to like have that tough conversation about there shouldn't be a term called appraiser bias, but we know it exists. To have to tiptoe through redlining, like it exists, but it's a formula. Like, what can we do? That's not on us. We can only meet in the middle the best way we can. So what are some conversations within your industries that are happening that are like, okay, we have this expectation for them to come up, but how are we going to meet them where they are? What are those conversations like? Because that to me is where progress really lies.
I think for what we have seen in our area is the neighborhood association is so important, and I know it's hard because there was a lot of conversation about the jail, and this you're going against the county commissioners and all of that. It's different, I think. But a local, at least for our neighborhoods, I think the neighborhood association is important to have, to be strong, to have a voice, because there are a lot of benefits that the city listens, and sometimes it takes long, but they listen, and then later on, and then I know the Plan Commission, they try their best to make sure that when there is an application to do some development in a certain area, they always want to look at what the neighborhood association is saying. Is the neighborhood association agrees to that? Again, with the jail, I don't know that you couldn't do anything. It's just incredible to see that, right? But that's one of the things. The other thing too, when it comes to the mortgage companies or banks, I think one of the things we can do as individuals, I think, is just to keep them accountable. I think we want to make sure that we keep them accountable to make sure that they're really doing. There's the CRAs, right, from the banks that they have to do. But part of it, what they do is to help people of color, people in communities in distress. And so I think that's one of the things we got to organize and make sure that we keep them accountable to do. And I tell you, there's a lot of good partners out there. We have partners that we partner with, and they're helping us to, help create solutions for people who want to have home ownership, and they help them then with that path. But keep them accountable. I think that's important.
And as far as, the appraisal bias, they have boards and associations that they have to be accountable to as well with their licenses. So, again, going back to my comment before, us as consumers not being afraid to say something, to point something out, to report something, we have the resources here to do just that, legal resources at that. So, getting in touch with your whatever that immediate resource is, the licensing, their boards, the appraisal boards, things like that. They're not a locked door. We can walk through those doors and have conversations.
Thank you. I just kind of want to go back a little bit when we was talking about someone, like, you purchase a home in an area, and then like electric works goes up, then all of a sudden your area is so much more valued now. And it does take the value. I was speaking just a few weeks ago, speaking to a young woman that purchased a home kind of in the downtown area a little bit, past there. And she said, when I bought my home, I think her taxes was like maybe $500-600 a year. She said, and now that electric work is there, she says, my taxes now is $3,500 a year.
Wow.
That's a heck of a jump. So now, my thing is that when you're talking about passing on wealth, if that occurs, and I want our neighborhood to be valued good and so forth, but if the homeowner can't no longer, not so much they can't afford the mortgage anymore, because the mortgage is usually set, but heck, if they can't afford the taxes, then how do you pass on? How do we build, generational wealth from that? Because now the parent's going to have to leave, so, I mean, is there something we can do about, I mean, we want the value, but we don't want to be, you know, outvalued out of the house. You know, okay, there's something like what they call it now, grandfathered in or something like that, you know.
At a state level, they can actually be a policy where they can have limits. The county, the assessors cannot raise. I know it's in other communities, they have that, other counties, where if you haven't done any improvements to your home and you still see a double, to double your taxes, like why is that?
Right.
So, yeah,
And
there's policies.
I do believe that there is the ability to appeal the assessment, the assessed value.
Right.
So it, if she can show evidence that, gosh, look, it went from this to this, explain it, or can it be adjusted? So it's worth asking the question, yeah.
And I just wanted to add in that scenario, when you think about it from a holistic standpoint, if your taxes are increasing that much, your home value is increasing at the same rate. So when we talk about generational wealth building, even though you're paying more in taxes, that value of that home has increased equally as much, if not 2 to 3 times more. So I just kind of wanted to throw that answer out there. Also wanted to give a additional question. Does anybody in the room have any places that they get like advocacy for conversations and dialogue like this? Because I would love to be a part of any course, class, any interaction that has that type of dialogue. That's for the panel or for the room.
Meaning you want to go to a place that's talking about something like that?
Yeah, exactly like
and buying homes, or what to look for to buy a home, or the whole thing. Well, the last I heard, Fort Wayne Housing Authority had a program as such. And they had a program that anyone was getting ready to buy a house. They would have people in from the banks to let you know what to do, how to do your monies, you get ready to buy, pay down bills, car payments, credit cards. Then, of course, if then they had someone to come in to talk about the appraisal, or talk about someone who was your realtor, your real estate person, what he or she should be doing for you as such. That's what you mean? Yeah. And that, okay, well, you can contact the place I knew that was doing was Fort Wayne Housing. Fort Wayne Housing Authority. They had such, I don't know if they still do, but that's the program I went through when I got ready to buy.
And Jim, I mentioned earlier too, some housing fairs as well to help.
Some workshops. If you'll keep your eye out on different workshops, different realtors put them on, different lenders put them on. I know, again, I mentioned Rainey is one of the bigger ones. And then as far as community conversations, you'll probably find those there too, because there's so many people engaged in that organization that you can have great conversations with. Rainey.
I think that's the election.
Yeah. So Realtors Association. One more time. Sorry.
Association of Northeast Indiana.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, yes, so that was the Realtor Association of Northeast Indiana. Realtist Association of Northeast Indiana. Well, we will close out our dialogue with that. Remember, we all can be advocates of fair housing. We all can be good neighbors and mentors to others who are, looking to grow their equity. Share this information. Please take home those flyers with the QR code. There is a ton of different resources, from articles to videos that talk about equitable housing and actionable steps that we can do as a community to push for equitable housing. Again, I really want to thank our panelists, Gemma, Javier, and Jennifer, for providing your expertise today. We really appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your day. Thank you.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Thank you for
I have a
It was nice.
to offer.
Oh.
See? It's awesome.
Crossing paths more.
Yeah. It was awesome.
No, you guys are great. Thank you. I mean, what you guys do is like